Chapter 9. Detective. Michael Valentin glowered at his computer screen and contemplated homicide. This wasn't an unusual state of affairs for the man, except for the fact that he was considering how to commit one, not how to solve one. "You okay, Dad?" A poke to his shoulder from his elder son roused him somewhat. Jeremy's concern was palpable but unnecessary. "I'm fine," he snapped. "Geez, who put salt in your coffee? You know full well he dropped a flash drive in your backpack." "You're still on about that? I didn't even see him." "Doesn't matter." He rewound the video again in what a weaker man would call an exercise in futility. "He used you, and he could have killed you if he wanted. The fact that he knew your relationship to me is deeply unnerving. I want him caught." Jeremy's eyes twitched in a way that suggested he was fighting the urge to roll them. "You're not going to find him by burning his speech into your corneas. Take it to the station for a second opinion." It was a sensible suggestion. Michael hated it, but that was more than likely just his mood. His tendency towards misanthropy when irritated was something he'd struggled with for years, and the discovery of the flash drive in his son's backpack hadn't helped. At least he knew Jeremy was unharmed. If he had been hurt, he was certain he'd be on a literal warpath, not a figurative one. He ejected the eye-searingly colorful drive and stomped off. Jeremy trailed behind him like an older sibling trying to talk a younger one out of sledding off the roof. "You just got back. I meant you should bring it in tomorrow morning." "No time like the present," he shot back with more temper than intended. Jeremy winced, and guilt hit Michael right in the soft spot. He patted his son's shoulder comfortingly. "Sorry, I'm not mad at you." "I know that." He huffed and shrugged the hand off. "You're just running off on the tail of some new obsession. Again." That hurt. Don't gem me. You always do this." "I'm doing this for your safety." "He didn't touch me." "He could have." "Arg!" Jeremy threw up his hands. "You're hopeless." He stormed off, and Michael watched him go. He doubted his son would be so blasé if it had been an established supervillain, and he worried the non-interaction would push him to seek out the stranger. If that happened, Jeremy could wind up as collateral damage. He couldn't let that happen. Resolve firmed, he grabbed his keys. His junk pile of a car growled, groaned, spluttered, and finally wheezed to life after a concerningly loud backfire. He really should get that looked at. Traffic was choked and flowing in the wrong direction. Getting to the station was a nightmare. Finding a parking spot was equally awful. He wasn't surprised to see more cars in the parking lot than usual. Standard operating procedure when a villain attack was imminent. He marched in. "I need a conference room," he declared to Callie, the receptionist and beating heart of the district. While it wasn't technically in her purview, she knew everything about what went on inside the station's walls, and if he needed anything in a hurry, she was the person to ask. "Didn't you leave an hour ago?" she asked, lacquered red nails never stopping their clacking at the keyboard. "New evidence came in. I need whoever's here on the Prince Snow attack." "Can do." She hit a key with a decisive clack. "Room 2. Archer and Fitz are in. Bianchi is gone." "What's so urgent, anyway?" "Message for the Prince." "Oh?" There was a curious sparkle in her eyes. Had he been less mature, he'd have rolled his own. "Classified." "Had to ask. Now be gone. I'm off duty soon, and I have procrastination to do." Conference room 2 had bright lights, a large central table ringed by swivel chairs, and a whiteboard and computer at the head. Michael plugged the flash drive in and got ready. The pair he was waiting for came in at the same time. Lionel Archer, Michael's partner, was the taller of the two and athletic even into his 40s. The gray in his hair blended well into the blonde, and a small scar from a confrontation years ago cut up into the corner of his lip. David Fitz, on the other hand, was small, wiry, and younger than Lionel by a decade. His hair was a half-inch longer and several shades darker, and he had calluses on his hands that suggested spare time spent at the firing range. Both of them were good men and good cops. Michael didn't wait for them to sit. I got a message from Prince Snow's target sent to me via my son. Their expressions of shock were identical. What happened? Is he okay? Lionel asked. He's fine. Described the encounter as a, quote, reverse pickpocketing. Didn't see or feel who did it. So much for that lead, then. Unfortunately, he could have picked it up way too many times over the past 2 days. Now we only have until tomorrow afternoon to react. Do you think it was planned that way? That was Fitz. Tough to say. Get over here and watch this. It'll give you a better idea of what we're dealing with. The screen was small enough that they had to squish together to see it clearly. Michael backed off to give the other two some breathing space. The message was a short and simple video. Someone dressed in all black stood in front of a white backdrop. His face was covered with a medical face mask and oversized sunglasses, and what skin was visible appeared blurry as Lord Static's used to. The bots were flying around him as if in a bid to prove the speaker's identity, and they generated an undertone that obscured any background noise. Greetings, Prince Snow, said the person on the screen in a baritone that buzzed the way Lord Static's bass had. I am the individual currently in possession of the deceased Lord Static's nanotechnology. I heard your declaration. Unfortunately, I cannot relinquish the nanobots to you. Because, of course, it couldn't be that easy. They could have brokered a deal if that was the case. The figure continued speaking. His posture was relaxed and his tone was even, but Michael could see faint perspiration marks on his sweatshirt. This whole thing was scripted and rehearsed, even if not for long. Rest assured, I have no wish to usurp your position as his successor. If anything, I would prefer to remain out of the conflict between supers. Your own nanotechnology appears adequate for your needs. Kindly cease further attempts to contact me. If you must, know this. I am Swarm. We are Legion. The video cut to black. Thoughts? Michael asked. Officer Bianchi needs to see this too, Fitz responded. That would bring the whole team up to speed. My main question is, why did he give this to you specifically? Elaborate. He could have sent this to a news station and gotten it distributed immediately. Why leave the choice up to you, and you in particular? Does he know you? He'll have copies if he's smart. As for that, he might know of me, maybe. He knows of Jeremy for sure. He couldn't hide his anger at that. Easy, Papa Wolf, Lionel said. Pretty much anyone who knows you is aware you have kids you love to pieces. It's not that hard to make the connection. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Yes, it didn't. I figured. Back on topic, you two. Are we sure this is real? It could be a fake, a prank. We should rule that out before getting too invested. He was right. This is some prank if that's true. It looks legit, though. Do we have any verification methods besides video analysis? That would take forever. Lionel tapped his chin. He sounds familiar. Got it. Remember the witness's call from Lord Static's case? Cross-check the recording. We can see if the voices match. Chances are good this guy and that one are the same person. Lionel had been the one to intercept that call. He'd been put out for days after he'd been incapable of finding the caller. It was a good idea, and Michael nodded his approval. Lionel opened up the precinct's database and tapped in the case number. His brow furrowed, and he typed something else. Then something else. Each failure darkened his expression further. What's wrong? Asked Fitz. The recording of the call's gone. The dumbfounded disbelief in Lionel's voice was matched only by the look on his face. He doubled down, and his hands flew across the keyboard. Not just the recording. Everything on the case. I can't find anything. It's like the evidence never existed. That's impossible. Fitz elbowed him over, then gaped. How the hell? Michael peered over their shoulders and was confronted by a set of reports detailing a bunch of petty crimes and the attack on the bank from the same day, but nothing in regards to the murder of a supervillain. Lionel swapped out keywords and checked the victim's alias instead of the date, and it was more of the same. Older records galore, nothing about his death. The repeated check for the case number led to a no results found page. Nothing else Lionel looked for yielded anything. According to the database, Lord Static may as well have vanished off the face of the earth. Except if that were the case, there'd be a missing persons report. The search dragged on for long minutes until Michael pulled the plug. "Cut it, Archer. This isn't working." He cursed and closed the database. "I'm calling tech. If this case is gone, who knows what else is missing? Finding out could take weeks." All three grimaced. "Things have just gotten a whole lot worse," Fitz observed. "Thank you, Captain Obvious," Michael snapped back. "How about a helpful statement?" "Fine. Here's one for you. We have no way to check Swarm in time now. He could be a gifted VFX artist for all we know." Michael sighed. He didn't like it, but we'll have to operate on the reasonable assumption that this is a legitimate response to Prince Snow's ultimatum from this Swarm character who is the person in possession of the nanobots at this time. Lionel cracked a smirk and pulled his phone away from his face. "You putting that in the report word for word?" "Probably." He ground the balls of his hands into his eyes. A headache loomed, and one more piece of bad news would tip the scales. "This is a nightmare." Lionel shook his head and went back to his call after saying, "If this was a nightmare, one of us would be singing." Michael lifted a hand to stop Fitz, who'd opened his mouth to bout out something obnoxious. He shut his mouth with a click. "Thank you." Headache still threatening, Michael told Fitz, "Go check the evidence locker. Make sure nothing in there has been tampered with." His sharp tone spurred him into action without so much as a snarky retort. This left Michael with Lionel's increasingly frustrated bargaining with the tech squad and a nagging sense of dread. Misfortunes come in threes, as the saying goes, and unless the pounding behind his eyes was the third, something big was about to come down on their heads. "Good news, bad news," Fitz declared as he came back. "Of course." Lionel's call had ended seconds before, and he swiveled his chair to get a better view of the other two. He watched Fitz intently as he said, "Bad news, anything physical for the Lord Static homicide's gone too. I found claw marks far back on the shelving. Good news, nothing else seemed to be disturbed." "Flight risk," Michael groaned, and his headache spiked. "Looks that way." Fitz ran a hand through his hair and rested the other on his hip. "I guess the question there is why? Was it a for-profit gig or a personal one?" "My money's on for-profit, if you'll pardon the pun," Lionel said with a grin that suggested he'd made it intentionally. Michael chose to let it go. Lionel carried on. "Flight Risk's not a tech guy, and he wasn't Lord Static's biggest fan. He might have been responsible for the physical stuff missing, but the digital stuff has to be somebody else. Whether that's the mastermind or not, I'm unsure, but either way, Flight Risk would work alone if this was personal." "Fair. But who and why, then?" "Best guess is one of the two clowns that split off from the not-so-dearly departed to cover up their identity. If it's not them, either one of the other crazies doing a posthumous favor for the victim, or the killer if Swarm didn't do it. Face it, Jimmy Boy was not well known when he wasn't in the suit, and he wasn't all that liked while he was in it. There's nobody who'd do something like this for that guy's civilian identity." This was why Lionel was a good cop and better partner. He could come up with scenarios like nobody Michael had ever met, and Michael's expertise was picking up those threads and spinning off other possibilities, finding tangles, or running them to their ends. It was why they made a formidable team. Michael exercised his own specialty when he said, "But Prince Snow would have had the bots if he'd been at the scene of the death. Him stealing our evidence doesn't make sense. There's no motive." "So, Swarm, then?" Fitz chimed in. "Or the killer, assuming Swarm's innocent," Lionel said. "Big assumption. I've made bigger." He shrugged and tapped his fingers on his knees. "We should get Dr. Kessler to take a look at our Swarm stuff. I can't get a handle on his angle. Getting in his head might help." Dr. Kessler was the precinct psychologist. He'd been chomping at the bit to psychoanalyze the new Psycho ever since Prince Snow's debut. Giving him the Swarm video would make his Christmas come early. Regardless, we have a super wreaking havoc in less than 24 hours, a murder suspect who's only communicating with us on his own terms, a video with a message nobody wants to hear, and a whole lot of missing evidence to deal with. He clapped his hands together and grinned like a daredevil. How are we handling this? The resulting debate evolved into an argument that lasted too long for any of their tastes. While they agreed that the missing evidence wasn't as urgent as the impending rampage, they couldn't come to a consensus on what to do about it. Michael wanted to hunt Swarm down, Lionel wanted to show the video to Prince Snow, and Fitz wanted to keep both the message and sender hidden. "We don't know how Prince Snow will react," he repeated for the umpteenth time. Michael had lost count around the time he'd been forced to leave him and Lionel to it in favor of getting a painkiller. They'd been locked in the same position by the time he'd come back. The painkiller was ineffective. Fitz continued. "He got a response, sure, but it's not the response he wants. It might piss him off and make things worse. Better to keep it on the down low and see if we can negotiate with him." "He's a supervillain. They don't negotiate, especially with us normies," Michael shot back. "It'd be smarter to show him the video so he knows there was a response. A refusal to hand over the nanobots is not going to make him calm down. Why don't we just find Swarm and get him to agree to our terms?" If a little force had to be applied, so much the better. It was what creeps like that deserved. "There's no time for that!" the other two shouted in unison. Again, damn it. He'd been so sure the 11th-ish time would be the charm. "As I was saying," Fitz ground out through clenched teeth, "we weren't equipped to handle Lord Static, and we're not equipped to handle Prince Snow. Especially not if he throws a hissy fit. We can't trust or handle Swarm either if he shows. We should just stay out of it, let them blow each other up, and handle the debris afterwards. It's standard operating procedure." "Look out a window, Fitz," Lionel snarled back. "The damn city's crumbling around our ears because of standard operating procedure." He said it like a curse. Publishing the video means being proactive for once in our careers. Michael could think of plenty of ways to be proactive, and most of them involved punching a particular superweapon. Maybe shooting him. He'd settle for a punch, though. Maybe more than one. "Screw our careers! There are lives at risk, Archer, in case you've forgotten. I damn well haven't, but it looks like you have." Okay, enough was enough. Time for Michael to break out the greatest weapon in his arsenal. Parental disapproval. "Are you two done?" He raised one eyebrow and crossed his arms. It worked just as well on two grown men as it did on a pair of squabbling 10- and 7-year-old boys. They broke off glaring at each other to stare at the floor and mumble apologies. Michael nodded. "Thank you. Now, this isn't going anywhere. My head feels like a bunch of the Doctor's creations are doing a Sousa march all over it, and I have to go home and check on my kids. We're all aware that you two are never going to agree to my proposal, so you are each going to present your solutions in a calm and reasonable manner. Then I will cast the deciding vote. Capiche?" They groused about it, but capitulated. He knew they would. "Good. I'll flip a coin to see who goes first. Heads or tails?" he asked. Fitz won with tails. Michael and Lionel gave him some time to collect his thoughts, then he was off to the races. Michael considered himself lucky he hadn't had the time to put together a slideshow. Prince Snow and Swarm are both clearly offshoots of Lord Static. We don't know to what extent he's influenced either of them. Prince Snow, at the very least, is willing to cause death and destruction to get what he wants. Michael winced at the reminder. While not as gory as Flight Risk's first heist, or as costly as Pulse's first attack on a construction site, Prince Snow's message had still resulted in a fatal car crash and 2 loss-of-limb injuries from debris and shattered glass. It might have been even messier if he hadn't gotten unlucky with his selection of hostages. As it stood, he'd snagged a kid and an old lady as 2 of his 4 victims, and the whole torture people for shock value thing really wouldn't fly after that. Come to think of it, their testimony might be useful if it hadn't vanished. Michael'd have to find it later, maybe do some follow-ups. He feels like he's been robbed and views Swarm with disdain. An outright denial from the man, one delivered impersonally, will only anger him. As for Swarm, we don't know enough about him to make assumptions. All we do know is that he has the nanobots, or the skill and a reason to pretend he does. He sent the video to Detective Valentin via his son, and he might have been the witness who called the station following Lord Static's murder. He placed his hands flat on the desk and leaned in. The fact that he hasn't done anything in 3 months suggests he wants to be left alone. I'd take that. It's better behavior than the rest of the crazies have ever displayed. But Prince Snow didn't do anything for 3 months either. Swarm could be planning his own coming out. His only interaction with us has been to use us as glorified messenger birds. We can't trust him or this message, and we sure shouldn't use it. All good points. Lionel was going to have to be pretty persuasive to top it. That everything? All the major stuff. He leaned back and headed to his seat. Floor's yours, Archer. Thanks. Lionel replaced Fitz at the front of the room and spread out a bunch of file folders. So while I agree with Officer Fitz that Swarm can't be trusted, I don't think he can't be used. Prince Snow's speech provoked him into a response, however convoluted and indirect. With the right push, we could get him on our side. A super helping us. A superhero, even. Keeping the video a secret is proving we don't trust him, and that'll make him mistrust us. Fitz rolled his eyes and twirled a pencil between his fingers. You don't seriously believe the kind of coward who drops flash drives in teenagers' backpacks could be a superhero. Don't make me laugh. Even coward hearts can bleed. It was a saying that had been popular in Calabria once upon a time and could still be heard on occasion. I don't know exactly what it is about Prince Snow that prompted Swarm to react, compared to any of the other local lunatics, but the fact that he thought to go through the police at all instead of just going to break heads suggests a measure of situational awareness. He wants the CPD's support. At the very least, he doesn't want to make an enemy of us. We should encourage that, not squash it. It's a big risk. It's a big risk either way. At least my plan secures a favor from a super. So, what's the verdict? He asked Michael. He bounced the eraser end of his pencil on the desk and considered pros and cons. It wasn't easy, but he made his decision. I'll talk to the chief and recommend we put it out there. If it blew up in their faces, he'd be there to mitigate the fallout. Who knew? He might even get the chance to get his payback on Swarm if he was lucky.